Welcome to Intimacy Evolution, the podcast that helps you enjoy deeper connection and more intimacy in your relationships. I'm Brianna Carey, relationship and intimacy coach, and together with my husband Mark, a licensed professional counselor, we're here to help couples create the relationships they crave. Relationships evolve over time, and that's okay. Let's talk about it. Hello, and welcome back to Intimacy Evolution. In this episode, I had a conversation with Ava Pikul, who is a board-certified sexologist, transformational therapist, and authentic Tantra practitioner. Y'all, my head was just like reeling with all of the information. I loved every single bit of it, and I'm really enjoying listening back to it and taking notes as well. So definitely mark this one down, save it, take notes, like all of the things, re-listen to it. Ava was just very informative and had a great way of breaking things down. She dissected what Tantra is, what it is not. I know that there might be some misconceptions around tantric practices and different things. And so she really broke that down, as well as her journey into this, which was really intriguing. She has guided hundreds of self-motivated individuals to liberate their sexual expression and discover spiritual fulfillment through Buddhist concepts, elemental healing, and up-to-date science. And we definitely unpacked what each of those are in this episode. I just really enjoyed her down-to-earth energy that made it really easy to have this conversation. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. I am excited to learn all about what you have to share. So welcome, Ava, to the show.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Yeah. I would love to know where you got started and how did you transition into your work today?
I often like to say that my story goes from stripper to sexpert with a lot of shit in between. I'm a transformational therapist. I'm an authentic Tantra practitioner. I'm a Tantra and shamanic movement guide, sex educator. So there's a lot of things in the realm of sexuality and healing that I help men, women, and couples through. And there was a point in time where I was super involved in the spiritual type community, I guess you can say. And I traveled to India and I did that whole shebang. And I'm like, I'm going to go to the birthplace of enlightenment, right? And um, I was actually very disappointed in my experience there. And I'll tell you why. It's because there was a lot of my own questions that went unanswered, and a lot that had to do with my own sexuality, not being involved in certain teachings, a lot of misconceptions, especially. Fast forward, I ended up becoming a stripper later down the line, and I learned a lot about my sexuality, as you can imagine. I learned a lot. Eventually, that type of environment was no longer serving me, and I ended up becoming a transformational therapist, an authentic Tantra practitioner. And again, I kept asking myself the same questions throughout this process of like, okay, what is Tantra? Like, I'm reading about it, I'm researching it, I'm really, really involved and within my interests. I'm so curious. I know that there's something more to my sexual experience that I'm not being told. And unfortunately, I did not find those answers once again. But eventually I fell into learning and now teaching lineage-based Tantra. So I'm sure that we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. But there's kind of this unique, special form, I guess you can say, of Tantra that I was so luckily involved in and was able to explore and become a part of. And it is a big part of my life now.
Oh, I love that. There's so much to unpack in all of that. And I'm excited to really like zoom in on some things. So, one, you said that you went to India and you were disappointed because you didn't have some questions answered. What were you hoping to find when you went on this exploration?
I just wanted to know, where was this bridge, this link between my spirituality and my sexuality? And in a lot of spiritual type communities, we're actually coming out of the body. We're coming out of the senses. We're transcending above and beyond our worldly experience. And there's many reasons why that can be dangerous and harmful, not for everyone, but for a lot of people, especially as a Westerner, I guess you can say. But that's basically what I was taught was close your eyes, you're in a dark room, you're meditating, you're coming out of your body. There's all these negative emotions that you have to basically transcend.
Yeah.
Your body is not yours type of attitude. And that quite frankly pissed me off. So, and there's that flip side of like now in the world of sacred sexuality and neo-tantra in the West, it's totally skewed and over sexualized to the point where the original teachings and the original intent is usually not being taught. So I was somewhere in the middle of like, okay, well, I'm not the type of person that needs or wants to transcend my body and disassociate from myself more. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm also not the type of person that just wants, to practice some sexual orgy in order to experience this enlightening orgasm experience because again, that's not the goal of Tantra at all. And
Yeah.
somewhere within me, I knew that. So I really wanted to, if I was going to go down that path, do it in a way that was in alignment with myself and my calling.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I'm just reflecting a little bit because, like you said, in the spiritual realm, communities, you are leaving your body or, coming out of the 3D more. But with sex, you need to be in the body. And that's what I focus a lot with women is getting them back into their body. And that sounds like what you're talking about as well. You're like, we need to find this in between. And so how did that lead you to becoming a stripper? And then how were you able to connect? I mean, that's a very in the body experience. I'm sure there are some that can like click out of it and just go through the motions, but it sounds like you were more present in it. And so can you talk about that a little bit more in your experience?
Absolutely. I think that becoming a stripper really started with my curiosity. Again, I was looking for answers and I wasn't getting, right. I wasn't getting the answers that was in alignment with me. I didn't connect with. So, and I actually didn't search out becoming a stripper. I wasn't like one day I'm going to become a stripper. It
Right.
actually just, it kind of fell into my lap. I had moved to North Florida after some traveling. I had just ended a relationship and I ran into a friend of a friend and she was like, I'm going to work tonight. Do you want to come with me? And I was so broke at that point in time in my life. I felt lost and
Mm,
stuck. And I was just kind of like going through the motions.
mm.
And I'm not the type of person that likes to just flow with emotions. I know there's a lot of talk around that right now, but I like to really go out there and form and choose a life that I desire, whether it's my sex life, whether it's my financial life, whatever that is. So I took
Mhm.
control of that and I chose to do that for a little while. And it was an amazing experience. I learned so many lessons within that period time in my life from my self-expression to how I can actually manipulate other people from my sexuality as well, right? So there
Yeah.
was that other flip side to it as well. And then there was a beauty to it, also connecting with men who haven't been touched, just skin to skin touch for
Yeah.
years. So there was also that form of being of service that is a big part of who I am. But again, that type of lifestyle just after a while did not suit me. And started to become more anxious and depressed, starting to disassociate from my body more, making choices that were just like, whoa, like, who am I? Making really bad choices. Um, but long story short, I did end up um, forming a beautiful relationship with a man that I met 5 years ago, and the rest is kind of history. I started to leave that environment, and then became an authentic Tantra practitioner and really starting on this healing journey and becoming an advocate, not just for my pleasure, but for all of humanity. And that requires justice as well. I'm a huge advocate for justice and not just indulging in my own pleasures, but also for the benefit of all of humanity. So yeah.
I love all of it. I am like unraveling some questions too. Because there was something that you said that really touched me and pulled on my heart a little bit. You said how you were able to connect with men just through the touch, the physical touch that they had not experienced in years. And I mean, just at our basic core, like we need connection as human beings. And it doesn't have to be sexual, just a hug, a hand on your shoulder, like just connecting with another human is so needed. And as a society, we are completely disconnected. And so hearing that, I'm just like, I can only imagine how much more you're going to share and how you can connect even deeper with intentionality with a partner or with yourself, even. And so you have now transitioned into being an authentic Tantra practitioner. Can you explain that more? I hear the word Tantra a lot, and I'm sure maybe our listeners too, but what exactly is Tantra? And I know we were talking before we started recording too. You said there's a lot of misconceptions about what Tantra is as well. So can you kind of break that down?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I really like to acknowledge and to explain is that there is a difference between Neo Tantra and um, New Age Tantra, sacred sexuality, and then lineage based Tantra. So when I say I teach authentic Tantra, I mean I teach lineage based authentic Tantra. And in particular, I teach from Tibetan Buddhist Tantra, the Tibetan Five Elements. It's also called Baby Vajrayana. So there's these elements that I incorporate into my own practice, and then other, you know, practices that are less advanced to my clients as well. And if we circle back to like Neo Tantra, New Age, sacred sexuality, that's what we're seeing most of in the world right now. Um, and before I talk more about that, I just want to say that there are some great Neo Tantra practitioners out there, but most of them are not. And that's my personal opinion, my personal experience, and that of many others. Neo Tantra is not based in any lineage in particular. It's where there's a lot of appropriation that unfortunately happens. There's a lot of sexual misconduct that will happen in certain communities. I will not say right now, but the thing with Tantra is that the medicine and the message is encoded in the practices themselves. So if you are practicing neo-based Tantra, for example, say you're doing some Kundalini exercise, right? And it's not rooted in the original intentions, that can be very karmically dangerous and karmically, energetically, right, intertwined with things that are not very good.
Okay.
There also needs to be a foundation before you practice Tantra, right? So you just mentioned about the importance of connection. Most people cannot connect. I mean, not even with themselves, let alone another person. So a lot of times you're going to these Neo Tantra events and you're connecting with other people. Maybe it's your partner. I mean, that's better than a stranger at first if you're just learning Tantra. But there's things that can come up that you are not prepared and you don't have a foundation in order to address. So there's a lot of reasons why I do not advocate or practice Neo-based Tantra. Just know that there's a difference. And it's really important that when you are looking for a Tantra practitioner, to have an understanding of what the intention is that you desire moving forward. Because unfortunately, not as much anymore, but early in my practice, I had a lot of people reach out and basically just ask for erotic massages. And that's not Tantra. That's sex work. That's wonderful. That's needed in the world, but that's not authentic lineage-based Tantra. There's certain aspects of healing massage and lineage-based Tantra, but there's no specific teachings surrounding like Kama Sutra or something like that. That's not really addressed in lineage-based Tantra. Lineage-based Tantra is about healing and for the betterment of all of humanity and not just ourselves. So again, Neo-Tantra is a lot about like me, 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 me. I want to have these great experiences. I want to have a better sex life. I want to have this blissful, ecstatic, multi-orgasmic life. And that's very rooted in a lot of ego, and it can be dangerous to just go into quote unquote spiritual practices with that motivation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because what I was hearing was a lot of surface level experiences, or not the deep healing work that lineage tantra is going to help you facilitate. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say
Or like,
lineage-based tantra is about the we in the picture. Like obviously we still need to lay the foundation and the groundwork for connection, right? Because true tantric practice happens after connection has been established. But a lot of people are going to be situated in this fostering of connection, understanding themselves and maybe another person if they have a partner, maybe for their whole lives, maybe for several decades, maybe for several months, depending on who you are. So just that baseline understanding of, even sexual based tantra, it's a thing that happens after the connection has been established.
Can you move into that? So a client comes to you, what are you seeing as commonalities, or how do you start working to create the connection within self first before they move into connecting with a partner?
Yeah. First thing I want to say is that you don't need a partner in order to practice Tantra.
Sure.
And in fact, it always begins by yourself. I practiced for almost 3 years by myself before involving my partner in those practices because it was such a huge healing experience for me. Uh, and it was way too intimate and vulnerable to involve my partner in that, which is completely okay. A lot of people will come to me pretty much because they lack fulfillment in their sex lives, in their lives overall. So whether that's because they haven't attracted a partner into their life yet, whether they have sexual dysfunction, whether they can't orgasm, right? Our sex lives and the state of where we're at within our sexuality affects our mental health. It affects us on all levels.
Yeah.
So it does need to be addressed through this holistic manner. We're not just addressing the sexual issues. In fact, most sexual issues have a non-sexual solution. But a lot of the times that it's that thing that keeps showing up that people can't put their finger on, but they know something is there. And that's when they come to me. Sometimes there's individuals that have been involved in other forms of Tantra, whether it's classical Tantra, Neo-Tantra, whatever it is, and they still feel like there's pieces missing and they still don't know what Tantra is actually after doing that type of work. And then they'll come to me and really start to involve themselves in the healing process and starting to incorporate, the lineage-based Tantra into that process as well.
Feel like we're getting into like some good stuff. So, one of the questions I did have on here was about how pleasure is used to heal and release trauma. So, connecting to self, is that what's going to help kind of bring up some of this? Maybe they didn't even know it was there, or do oftentimes they know that something is there that they need to kind of resolve or clear or heal?
A lot of the times you don't know, and sometimes you don't have to know.
Right.
So through this process, I teach people how to use their emotions and their feelings and pleasure as a whole in order to work with those emotions and feelings. So we're actually using pleasure not just sexual pleasure, all forms of pleasure, in order to work through the emotions and the feelings, the belief systems, the things that keep you stuck and in loops. And we're actually using, right, that process of pleasure, what it can do for the nervous system, what it does for us in a karmic, energetic sense. And
Mm.
we're removing those blockages and barriers and disconnections in the system as a whole within the brain. And again, on that energetic level as well, by using pleasure and by using our sexuality. So we're actually repairing those ruptures within ourselves. And a lot of times, we don't always know what it is, right? We can feel these weird emotions come up and things might start happening in our lives that are just unexplainable. But through the practice, we're able to just work with it, right? Rather than forcing ourselves through it. And eventually it starts to dissolve and dissipate. So I think that a lot of times in this healing process, some of us can get so wrapped up in this analysis paralysis where like, I have to pinpoint exactly what that is, where it is in my body, the emotions, da 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 da. Like,
Yeah.
yes, that's the initial parts. But as you move into a true tantric practice, you don't always have to know what's coming up and why it's coming up. You just let it be and you let it dissolve on its own. You flush it down the toilet. You don't have to inspect it, you know? So that's a huge part of that healing process.
Yeah. Oh, I hear so much in that. Yeah. Um, working with women, especially doing embodiment practices, I notice that a lot of times they're like, I'm feeling something. I'm like, just let it go. Let it go. We don't have to like know what it is or why it is. And I do that with my kids too. I'm like, you're feeling something and that's okay. Just like keep moving, let it get out. So I love that. Um, a question that keeps coming up as I hear you talking, um, trying to figure out how to word this because yoni massage is coming to mind. So, is yoni massage considered lineage tantra? Is it even considered a tantra practice? I know that a
Yeah.
lot can be cleared through that because, especially like, cervical orgasms that are, because that's attached to the vagal nerve, and I hear that's very heart opening. It's a very connective experience. Clearing, just there's so much that can happen through that. So I don't know what that is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. The answer is yes and no. So, as an authentic tantra practitioner, we do weave in science and sexology and up to date things about anatomy because that those are all so necessary in terms of connection to be established before we're going into these other more advanced type practices. So that is definitely something that I teach, especially when it comes to like the 15 different forms of orgasm for women, the 10 different forms of orgasm for men. To become multi-orgasmic in our Western world, you have to understand your own anatomy, and not just the energetics behind it. I think our Western minds want to make sense of why we're doing a specific practice, why we're learning a specific thing. So I love to geek out on that type of stuff. And then what I do is I layer that lineage-based tantra on top of those foundational teachings. So that can involve doing yoni massage, linga massage. I will always teach this on a model, like on a
Mhm.
silicone model to my clients to do on themselves first.
Yeah.
Um, and I usually only do online for the most part right now anyway. So there's no way I can do hands-on work with people, but this is such a foundational and great way for men and women and couples, especially
Mhm.
to learn the different zones of the vulva, the vagina, and start to work with the blockages that are coming up during those types of practices. And then as that person evolves, they
Mm.
have the opportunity to start to layer tantra on top. So what I mean by that is we're layering intention on top, we're layering visualization on top of that, we're layering the healing system of the elements on top, because again, I teach the Tibetan Five Elements that are incorporated and can be woven into these sexual and non-sexual based practices to amplify the healing effects. So the answer to that is yes and no, right? That it's yes because we can layer Tantra on top, but no in the sense that I don't believe there's any like lineage texts out there. I can be mistaken and I can correct myself later. But from what I know of, there's not like specific texts out there that are like step 1, 2, 3, 4. This is how you do a yoni massage. And,
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely elements out there, like in Tibetan medicine, of, the benefits of working with the pelvic floor, and,
Right.
especially in like Taoist teachings as well. You can find a lot of information about that. But in a sense of like talking just about yoni or linga massage and in tantric text, I don't believe that necessarily exists.
Okay. Yeah. Can you go back and talk about the five Tibetan elements? Like, what are those? And then you're talking about layering different things on top of the practices. So can you like dissect that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the Tibetan Five Elements, I'll give you a little bit of history,
Okay.
just because I want you to know I'm not pulling this out of thin air. So the Tibetan Five Elements, they were originally practiced in Tibet by the native people, the Bonpo people of
Mm,
Tibet, and they were shamans. They practiced elemental magic, right? We hear a lot about this, even with Native Americans, and they were working with the earth and the elements. And then when Buddhism entered Tibet, it became woven into and embedded into, I believe, the Tibetan culture as well as the practice of Buddhism itself. So the Tibetan Five Elements became woven into Buddhist Tantra or Buddhism as a whole when it entered Tibet, thousands of years ago. So as I teach lineage-based Tantra, those Tibetan Five Elements can be applied to anybody, even
mhm,
if you don't have any meditation experience. That's the beauty of it. It's not advanced like Vajrayana Tantra where, you're blowing yourself out of the water. These are very tangible, very accessible teachings that we have been blessed to bring through the Institute of Authentic Tantra from the blessing of our Lama, who was taught by Kalu Rinpoche. You don't have to know who that is, just giving you a little background. But the Tibetan Five Elements are basically um, our energy system. So it's fire at our sexual center. It goes earth at our navel, space at our heart, air at our throat, and water in the center of the head.
mm,
Um, so basically, when we work with the elemental system, there's all of these different qualities and uh, the qualities and the wisdom that can arise from each of these. Okay.
mhm,
So a good example is why do we work with the elemental system is because the energy body is senior to the physical body. So the energy body is senior to the physical body. Anything that is going on in your physical body, and this is talked a lot about in Tibetan medicine, is affecting us in a mental level, psychological level, as well as somatic and physical levels as well. So when we're working directly with that energy system, and because it's been practiced for thousands of years, I mean, the Shangpakal lineage of Tibetan Buddhist Tantra is very, very old. And
mhm,
these are the feminine emanation of the elements. And they're very, very powerful. And a lot of times when people start practicing with them, like, this is pretty straightforward. Maybe it feels pretty simple, but the medicine is so greatly um, concentrated within this system. It is pure medicine. So
mhm,
as I move forward with people that I'm working with, we can basically use that elemental system kind of like our medication. We can look at the elemental chart or do an elemental scan and determine which element we need more of
mhm,
that day. For example, the water element is the antidote to anger. The anger is one of the five root poisons. So each one of these align with the one of the root poisons that that creates a lot of suffering in our lives. So water is the antidote to anger, and the opposite of that is clarity. So by practicing with the water element, we can, right, we form clarity within our lives. And think about it, right? That makes sense that it's in the head, because when we're angry, we're hot headed, we're not thinking straight.
Yeah. Yeah.
So working with the water element again can help us to resolve things in our lives of, the decisions that we make, getting clarity on specific things.
Mm.
And that's just a general, that's pretty general. They do go deeper than that, but that's just to give you a little bit more of a background on how we can use that elemental system basically to, um, basically as our guide.
I'm so excited to go and look into this and look into this more and dive into that because that connection right there, like hot-headed, water, clarity, like makes so much sense. So I'm like, okay, what else can we dive into with that? I love it. Um, how then does one that has been doing this connection to self, then how do they start incorporating this with a partner? Like
Yeah.
what would be like um the process of integrating the work with their partner? Because I'm sure if they've been doing this and then they're like, "Okay, give me a yoni massage. Like, let's get into it." They're like, "What are you even talking about?" So how do you build into that?
Yeah. One of the best ways is through communication, especially nonviolent communication is a huge part of that, right? I'm sure that you know a lot about that, as well as, right, then moving into sexual communication. So when you want to start involving your partner, it starts with those non sexual points of connection, right? Regulating the nervous system with one another, activating that connection circuit within the body. I do a lot of work with the ventral vagal pathways. So there's different practices and simple things like eye gazing, syncing your breath together. That there's just these simple things that you can start with, and then gradually build up into more of a sexual based practice. And something that I really love within that is that you can give to your partner, say a yogi or a linga massage, while practicing those communication points, and there doesn't have to be any type of sexual penetration. And that gives that person who's receiving a little bit more control and a little bit
Mhm.
more say in what's happening. They can, assess what's coming up for them. Because again, it's a huge healing process that can be very vulnerable, especially for couples, uh, to start out non sexually and then move into maybe just hands on type practices, and then eventually learning how to move into a more unionized practice, I guess you can say, where maybe the man is learning some semen retention techniques, in a safe way.
Mhm, yeah.
um, and and then they can start to through that build through that process, because again, I say more advanced because I know the power of the practices and the medicine that they hold. So even things like sexual penetration with your partner while you're, practicing with the Tibetan Five Elements, for example, can like have big effects on your partner who's not practicing with the Tibetan Five Elements, for example. So there's these small precautions and ways to incorporate that, but it really depends on every individual and where they're at.
I'm just so excited. Um, I just really love everything you said, and I was also reflecting on some, stuff my husband and I have done. It wasn't intentional, but, like, how things like, when we were able to have just, like, this nice slow exploration of each other and, like, the buildup of that, and, like, we didn't intend to go into a practice. Like, those experiences were some of the most, like, connective, just deep, just so, like, you just feel so
Yeah.
mushy and yummy after, and it's like, "Wow, what was that? Let's do more
Yeah.
of that."
Yeah.
It felt so good.
You're becoming one with the universe. You're meeting God within your sexual expression. And
Yeah.
that is really, um, there's no goals in Tantra, but I would say
Mm,
that's one of the things that can arise through a sexual practice with someone that you're truly aligned with.
mhm.
And that is just beyond words. That is, I believe that that is how we're all meant to experience our sexuality. And having that type of connection, that ultimate connection is true fulfillment. And you're not, once you feel that and touch on that true piece of fulfillment, you don't want anything else.
Yeah.
These pieces of gratification, like, sure, we all want to get fucked sometimes, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
And right, there's space for that ability for us to have more fulfillment, where it's not just about us. We're melding into
Mm-hmm.
the universe as a whole. It doesn't become just about ourselves anymore, or our orgasmic process, and we're caught up in our mind games of like, am I going to come? Am I not going to come? None of that matters anymore.
Mm.
And that can take a lot of time to have those types of experiences. But again, that whole process, it's not about pushing towards that, right?
Yes.
It's not even about having the intention of experiencing that. It's just the connection as a whole.
Mm.
And when you're able to settle into that, right, everything else seems to fall away.
Yes. It's a practice. It's supposed to be, long and just an experience. And I think what I have noticed when talking to women and couples is that everything is so rushed. Like you said before, it's so focused on we're struggling with our sex life. And then when you give them, ABC steps before, they're trying to get to the XYZ, like, let's just get to the sex. And it's like, well, we need to build into that. Um, yeah, like it, especially with who we work with a lot of people that have kids. And so they're like, our time is just not there. So is there any way that you suggest, how can someone start building this practice? Maybe if they do have limited time, maybe a couple that has kids and they're like, we have maybe 2 episodes of Bluey, which is like 10 minutes. Like, or like, what are some ways that you can like start incorporating this?
You can have tantra quickies. There's nothing wrong with with tantra quickies, right? It doesn't even have to involve sexual penetration. So
Yeah.
that is a big thing that I teach a lot of couples is, how to have an orgasmic awareness practice with your partner in 10 to 20 minutes, and fostering that connection, that
Mm.
build up that fire with one another, without there having to be this end goal of sexual penetration or even ejaculation or orgasm.
Yeah.
But that again is something that some people or some couples might not be able to wrap their head around there, because right, of that goal orientation towards
Mhm.
sex. So that first step in any process, that if I work with couples, I'm always working with them individually first, because we
Mm.
have to address the self-limiting beliefs. We have to address the beliefs just about orgasm, for example, right? In order to
Yes.
fully start to step into um, that fulfillment piece. And, our nervous systems and our brain, especially for men with an ejaculatory orgasm, you're wired for it. That's the type of
Mhm.
orgasm that you've been experiencing for your entire life. So breaking out of that, and in a way that is still in alignment with you can start to shed and mourn and grieve, right? Those constant ejaculatory orgasms.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the same way for my partner as well. There was a healing process that I was not anticipating when he started to do practice semen retention, for example. Um, and it- again, Tantra is not about the goal, but in a sense of like, when you're paying me to work with you, there has to be like, what do you want to come out of the relationship, your sexuality, and
Yeah.
being able to first address what's limiting you from even taking those first steps forward, right?
Mhm.
Is that first thing. You have to be on the same page if you're going to involve your partner on this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. A phrase that comes to mind is commit to the process, detach from the outcome. And like you said, a lot of mostly men that focus on that, like um, ejaculation or making their partner orgasm. And if they didn't, then they didn't do their job.
Mm.
And I feel like that just creates a lot of safety for women, taking that pressure off and that allows them just to really feel into the experience and enjoy it without feeling the pressure that they need to orgasm for their partner to feel like they did their job. It's like a whole cycle. And so I just think that that creates a lot of ease. And then you are able to just really lean into the experience and the pleasure and the connection.
Yeah.
Um,
And then that also gives you a chance to look at different attachment styles that you're hanging on
mm,
to, where you're people pleasing in your relationship, where you're self sabotaging. I mean, that was a huge thing for me. Like
yeah.
self sabotaging everything, you know, including the best sex of my life was my partner, sabotaging that because of my
Mm,
own inability to trust, for example, you know? So
yeah.
it does give you an opportunity to look at those things too.
Mm. I have a question. Can you clarify what semen retention is and why someone might want to experience that?
Yeah, absolutely. This one's for the lingam owners, the penis owners. Semen retention is this is a Taoist teaching. There's actually some great books that I recommend. I forget the name of it now, but I'm sure I'll send it to you. You could put it in the show notes.
Perfect.
Um, but semen retention is done for several reasons. I mean, if you want to put this into perspective, it takes the body 1 cup of blood to produce 1 drop of semen. So semen is it is life force. It and it has necessary nutrients in it. So when you start to do a semen retention practice, I know that sounds really scary, but it's it's not. This is actually the first step to becoming multi-orgasmic is first, you know, being able to last longer with sensation and then learning how to orgasm without ejaculation. So that's what semen retention is. I know a lot of people teach this in a way of like you just abstain from sex or you stop the sexual process completely before you
Mm,
ejaculate. And that's not what I'm talking about. You can actually, when you learn semen retention correctly, you can actually orgasm without ejaculation. So you can go over the edge without actually ejaculating that wonderful nutrients. And, you know, my partner has told me that he feels more energized. Not only that, your testosterone will go through the roof because every time you ejaculate, your testosterone totally plummets.
yeah.
So imagine, you know, guys who are, you know, masturbating or ejaculating, you know, once to 3 times a day, I've heard sometimes, you know, depending on your age, you are incredibly depleted. You're depleting your organs and
Yeah.
your testosterone, which can create more issues. So that's one
Mm,
reason why. And then the other is because if you want to become multi-orgasmic, you know, learning semen retention is the way to start experiencing those different sensations and different types of orgasm in your body. Because we're lasting longer, you have complete control over your energy channels, you have complete control over all of that. So that's really a baseline to when you enter any tantric practice is being able to have control. Um, and it, again, you have to work with the mind in order to do this as well, right? It would be
mhm.
inappropriate of me to just say, go get a book and start practicing semen retention because I do not recommend that. You're probably going to suffer. So definitely have a professional who knows what they're doing if that's something you want to learn moving forward, because
Mm,
it does have a lot to do with controlling the mind's tendencies, working through any type of grieving process, right? Any type of anger or frustration that arises, and being able to start to purify those things through a tantric practice. Um, so, yeah, semen retention is something that I highly recommend. My sex life is absolutely amazing because of it.
mm,
And, you know, my partner, he does ejaculate occasionally, but he has a choice in when he's going to do that.
yeah.
And I think the choice part is really empowering. When you can choose whether or not you're going to ejaculate, that's really, really good stuff. You can do a
Yeah.
lot of great things with that. Um, And it's not just about pleasing your partner, but it's also about, right, you being able to experience those states of fulfillment as well.
Mhm. Yeah, kind of like the ultimate like self-control. Like if you're able to control that we're so ingrained with believing that is synonymous with orgasm, like you have no control over it. It just happens. It's your body. It's like, no, you actually do. You just have to be very mindful of it and work up to that. Thank you for explaining that. That was so insightful. Because I've heard of like edging, but that seems like it's more for just like singular experiences to prolong, but it not necessarily like the retention part of it.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that definitely is the first part. But again, edging can even be taught really incorrectly because you have to, right? A lot of times, edging practices are not incorporating connection, not incorporating uh, the nervous system and regulating, right? So there's more to it than meets the eye. You can read an article about edging, and I promise you, it's not going to tell you the full picture. Um, but that is part of it is being able to, right, prolong, and being able to relax with sensation. So that is the biggest part, being able to relax with sexual sensations.
Yeah.
Is that definitely that very first part of a semen retention practice?
Mm, that's so good. Yeah. Definitely would love to get the name of that book when you remember, and I'll put that in the show notes for sure. My mind is spinning. I feel like we covered a lot, and I'm so excited to listen back to this and like take notes and like take all these nuggets away. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners that maybe we didn't touch on?
I think I just want to address that tantric sex is not what's happening in like neo tantra communities where you're like having these kundalini awakenings and stuff like that. Tantric sex is is really what happens after connection has been established. And those are the words of a woman that I absolutely adore, Davy Ward Erickson. She's the founder of the Institute of Authentic Tantra, and I totally agree with that. Tantric sex is what happens after the connection has been established. And again, the connection can take a long time to establish with yourself, let alone a partner. So don't go down this rabbit hole of wanting to experience this specific thing, right? Like I was addressing in the beginning of our conversation, because you're going to be really disappointed and you're just going to be chasing gratification again. Uh, so just making that distinction can give you a lot of clarity moving forward in your journey. If you want to go down just right, Neo Tantra, sacred sexuality, that's great, wonderful. But if you want to truly transform your life on every level through your pleasure, through your sexuality, then learn lineage-based tantra from someone who is qualified.
Thank you so, so, so much. Can you please share with our listeners where they can find you and connect with you?
Absolutely. You can find me on IG at Ava Pikul. It's ava.pikul, or my website is flamewithintantra.com.
Wonderful. And again, yeah, we'll link all of that in the show notes. Thank you, Ava, so much for joining us today. I loved our conversation, and I'm excited to delve into this more myself. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us, and we'll see you all next week.